Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to be here. I come to the Netherlands fairly often, about twice a year, and I really love it here very much. And you actually are quite future focused compared to many other countries in the world. So I think that's a real positive for you. I'm going to talk to you today about the future of talent and just some observations about what I think is going on in the talent space that we're, many of us at least, are part of. How many of you are HR professionals? Okay, almost everyone. Everyone just a recruiter? Anyone just recruiting? Okay, a few recruiters. All right. So I think all the topics we're going to talk on are very important to both HR and to recruiting and to pretty much anything to do with people. So to get started, I just want to talk a little bit about a fundamental concept that I think is just really important for us to understand as we, move into basically we're into the second decade of the 21st century. And we've come out of the 20th century, which was a century where it was really focused on making stuff, making things. Now the 20th century was all about manufacturing. Almost the entire century, 100 years, was the entire focus of work, of business, was manufacturing. That was the core. And we spent 100 years getting really, really good at making things. And we're very good at that. And in this world, things were very complicated. They were difficult to solve, big problems to solve. How do you make a car that almost never fails? How do you build bridges or trains that run really quickly or bridges that are incredibly strong and last for decades? These are all the problems we had in the 20th century, and we solved those problems. And it was a very complicated space, but there was an answer for every problem. We're now in a very different place. We're in what they call a complex world. And the complex world is one where we don't have any answers. We don't know what the right thing is to do. When somebody says, should we do this or this, almost nobody has a definitive answer. They can't say, this is the right thing to do. Where if I ask an engineer, if I do this to this building, will it be good or bad? They can tell me. But I can't say to you, if we allow Uber to take over in the Netherlands, is that good or bad? We don't know. We don't have any rules to operate with. So this is a century of experimentation, at least a few decades of learning, and we learn by trial and error and experimentation. There's going to be a lot of mistakes. There's going to be a lot of things that don't work well. Maybe you can look at Uber as an example of a company that's struggling in many parts of the world, just banned from London a few weeks ago. Why? Because it doesn't fit our 20th century model of how things should be. And we've got a mindset, all of us have a mindset. This is the way it ought to be. This is the way it always has been, and therefore this is the way it always should be. And I think I'm here to tell you that it's not going to be the same. We're in a very different time and space than we were in the 20th century. And almost everything we think about is going to be different. So that's really an important thing to understand as we talk about where we're going. I think next year will be a big year of change. Every year is a big year of change in the talent space, and will be for the next decade or so. But I think we're going to see a lot more automation and AI in everything that we do in talent. Whether you're in just HR in general, whether you're in recruiting, anything we do with people is going to become more automated, and we're going to have more artificial intelligence, machine learning kinds of things helping us to do this. But that doesn't mean there's no place for us, and we'll talk about that. What we will do is just going to be different, very different. We're going to see a lot more changes in work, a lot more contingent workers, temporary workers, consultants, and probably many fewer permanent employees. And this is a big shift. This is a huge and challenging change for all of us in HR, because fundamentally everything we have been taught really is for the permanent workforce. It's not really for the temporary or the contingent workforce. So we're going to have to develop new rules, new operating principles, new regulations, and of course there'll be new laws that will guide us in that process. But governments are always behind where the rest of the world is. And that's just a normal thing. They'll catch up, but it takes them a long time to catch up. We're going to have a lot more information because of data, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. And we're going to have a lot more focus on learning, because learning and experimentation is probably the most important hallmark of the 21st century. Right? So let's talk a little bit about this. If you really think about it, in the 19th century and the 18th century and probably the 17th century, the most important asset that you could own was land. Land was the source of wealth, the source of income, and the source of food. So land was really a critical resource. In the 20th century, that changed. And in the 20th century, whoever controlled iron, coal, steel, oil, they were the big winners. They were the rich people. Who were the richest men in the world in the early 20th century? Rockefeller, Carnegie, Mellon. What did these people do? They owned oil, steel, mining, railroads. That was wealth. So what's the wealth today? Who are the richest people in the world today? Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, okay? What do they have? Data. That's what they have, information. Data is the source of wealth for the 21st century. So what you know about people, what you know about your employees, what you know about the potential employees is your source of strength and wealth. That is where the future is going to come from. What do you know about those people out there that you may want to hire? And this is what we have to become much better at in HR than we are today. How do we use data to make decisions about people, about anything that we have to do with human beings? So I think what we're seeing already is automation is already a big deal. It's replacing many jobs that are, typically routine jobs, both manual and non-manual jobs. So for example, if you're a secretary, those jobs are decreasing in number. If you're a clerk, they're decreasing in numbers. If you're an assembler of automobiles, those jobs are decreasing or even being eliminated. So a lot of the jobs that were relatively good jobs in the 20th century that paid okay wages are disappearing. And they're being replaced with jobs that require non-routine cognitive skills and non-routine manual skills. So this requires people that have a different set of skills, often more education, more learning and knowledge than they had before. And so if you are a auto worker, let's say, that assembled cars, and you've been displaced from that job, the jobs that are available to you require you probably to know more, to have more knowledge or information than you had before when you were working on the cars. So it's a challenge for people to make those transitions and to make the moves, but there's still jobs for those people if they're willing to learn and make those challenges, which is why I said one of the hallmarks of the 21st century is all about learning and your ability and willingness to learn. And that's going to be a really important skill of survival for the next couple of decades at least as we make this transition, okay? So lots of jobs are changing, not necessarily going away. There's still a lot of jobs, but they're different than they were before. This is a kind of an interesting and kind of almost fun chart from Oxford. Oxford about 2 years ago commissioned or hired or surveyed 325 computer experts around the world, and they asked them to predict when certain things would happen. And to give you an idea, everything is a range. The top one up there is when will we automate every job in the world? Okay? How long will that take? And the range is from 60 years to 200 plus years. Right? And the thing that's interesting about that is not so much the time frames, it's where those time frames came from. And the ones over here that are at the 60-year framework came from Asia. The ones that are in the 200-year time frame came from Europe and America. Okay? So either we're more skeptical and they're more optimistic, or they know something we don't know. I don't know which, all right? But it's really interesting to see their predictions up there. There's a lot of other things. I'll just switch over to this one. Retail salesperson. The experts, the average consensus is 14 years when we'll have automated all the retail sales positions. But I'll tell you something about that in a minute. 12 years till we automate truck drivers. 11 years until a robot can assemble any Lego set. All right? 6 years before a robot can fold your laundry. I actually saw a laundry folding machine, and it's got a long way to go. It can only fold things that are square. Okay? If it's not square, it makes a total mess. But if you have towels, it does a really good job on a towel. And what's interesting, that's the only clothing I can fold, all right? So, okay? And they said that the World Series of Poker, computers will win in 3 years at the World Series of Poker. Now, let's talk a little bit about that retail salesperson. What's interesting is for about the last 5 years, the number has been declining in the US of retail salespeople. Last year, it was the fastest growing occupation in America. And the increase is going up in the terms of retail salespeople. So this is a really good example of that complex world that I was talking about, where we don't really know what the heck's going on. And what we do know is that computers can do what retail salespeople do. We can all check our own groceries out of the supermarket. You know, we can do that. But the question is really, do you want to? And the fundamental question we have to ask about AI is, you know, we have a choice. Do you want it to be automated or not? And what's happening, I think, is people are saying, I'd rather talk to a person. And therefore, companies are going back to hiring sales associates. Also, there's another reason. What do sales associates do? They influence your buying decision. Okay? And so if I have it all automated, you walk in there and nothing is influencing you. But if I have a sales associate and they say, ooh, take a look at this, there's a pretty good chance you might buy that. But if nobody says anything to you, you might not even see it. So there is a value in that sales associate. So this is going to be a really interesting era where these are things we can do. The question is, do we want to? That's the real question. And we're going to have to make a choice about that. So how's all this automation and everything really going to affect the workforce? I think, first of all, we're having a very interesting phenomena. We spent the 20th century trying to make people look like machines. That's really what we did. We spent the entire century teaching people how to, you know, go to a factory every day, don't talk, don't do anything, just put the widget in the car, do it 500 times, and go home at the end of the day. And we tried to make you into a robot. And we did that for many, many jobs. Think of all the jobs in an office that are just routine, boring jobs, you know, where you just sit there all day and you stamp a piece of paper, or you check a box, or you fill out a form, or you talk to somebody on the phone, and it's very, very routine, and it's very much the same thing every day. Not very exciting, not very challenging, and you feel like a machine. So I think what we're happening is we've kind of crossed the line where we're actually making machines more like us and trying to make machines look more like people. You know, a friendly robot that works beside you, okay? Or whatever it is. But I think that the real consequence of this is that we're going to be able to be more human than we have been in the 20th century. And you know, we all look at the 20th century as sort of our benchmark of how things ought to be. But was it really the best life? Was it really an interesting, exciting, and fulfilling career that most people had? And I would say, my own opinion is, it wasn't. For the vast majority of workers, it was just a place to go and make some money. You weren't really excited, you weren't challenged, you weren't really happy at your job. It was just a place you went every day because it paid your bills. But wouldn't it be so much better if we could do what we wanted to do and have more freedom and choice? And I think that's what the 21st century is going to offer us. Not without challenges and not without risks, but the opportunity is there to make things very different and let the machines do the stuff that we never like to do anyways. Right? So I think you're going to see a lot more work. This is already happening. A lot more work is going to be project-oriented, and it's going to be staffed more with contingent workers of some type. Consultants, contractors, part-time people. But companies are actually starting to ask the question, who should be a permanent employee? And why should this person be a permanent employee? Could we do this job in some other way? Could we have a machine do it? Could we have a consultant do it? Could we have somebody who only works part-time do it? Could we have somebody do it from their house? You know, so we're asking the questions that we didn't ask before. And we couldn't ask those questions because we didn't have the technology that we have today to make it possible. But now you can do so many things remotely. So if you're a company, you're the CEO of a company, you're the head of HR in a company, you have to say, what's going to give our company the greatest flexibility? If we don't know where the world's going, if we're going to have to make decisions and change really quickly, how can you do that when you've got 3,000 people who expect a job tomorrow? But I can do it if I've got 50 or 100 people who are flexible, agile, and quick learners. Because then I can go in and say, hey, we're not going to do this anymore, we're going to do this. And hopefully they'll go, great, let's figure out how to do it. You cannot do that with a big, solid, permanent workforce. It's really hard. So it gives you more choices. It's often cheaper. It may not be cheaper in the short term, because you may pay a consultant more. But in the long term, you don't have a 20-year commitment. You don't have that long-term commitment to someone. And consultants and experts bring in new ideas. If you go to the same office every day and do the same job, how many new things do you ever see or hear? You know everybody, you work with the same people, you work with the same people maybe for years and years. Not a lot of new innovative ideas. But you bring somebody in from the outside, even for a week, or two, a month, whole bunch of new ideas. Why don't we do it this way? Why don't we do it that way? Let's try this. Things that nobody in your company would ever suggest. Okay? So there's a lot of benefits to it. Okay? And Robert Half says, the rise of the project-based roles over full-time position has sparked a seismic shift in the workforce. And if you're in a recruitment agency today, you have already seen the demand for temporary labor grow incredibly quickly, and the demand for permanent labor fairly flat or only growing in specific fields where there's a shortage of talent or they need specific skills. But for the most part, not a problem to find the right people you need. So I'd say the employer-work boundaries are kind of blurring. What's an employee? When I work with clients, I ask them, so what's an employee? How do you define that? And they really struggle. How do you define an employee? Some are free agents. They do whatever they want, whenever they want. They've got multiple skills. Some are consultants that have a particular depth of expertise. They do one particular thing really well. They're kind of your experts. You've got enterprise partners and suppliers who can do some of the work that you used to do. You can have a supplier do the work for you, a kind of outsourcing. You've got people that just want to work at home and not work all that much, just a little bit. And you've got people that want to be permanent employees, and there's probably other things I don't even have up there. There's all sorts of things that are happening out there. 40% of the US workforce is contingent, a little over 20% of the Dutch workforce is contingent. And it's going to grow, I think, in every country around the world. Asia is already at, Singapore is around 20-25% contingent. Saudi Arabia and the Middle East is highly contingent. Lots of places around the world. It's not just confined to the developed economies. It's also in growing parts of the world where contingent is the future. So I think the days when most of us are permanent employees are over. And I think if I looked in this room in 10 years, most of you would be independent in one way or another, and only a small number of you would be permanent employees. Okay? I think contingent jobs are creating jobs because of automation. So as you automate things, you create the need for new things. So as you automate, let's say the sales in your shop, and people can self-checkout, I just created a need for somebody to influence my customers, somebody to be more of a salesperson, not just a clerk. So I've upskilled the job, I've changed the nature of the job, but I still need people. I still need people to come in and do that. So we're actually creating jobs through automation as much as we're losing jobs. So I'm not a doomsday person that's saying, oh, everything's going to be automated and we're all going to be out of work. I am pretty sure that's not going to happen. But what we do is going to be different. It's going to be very different. And it's going to require us, as I said before, to have new skills to do it. So I think Deloitte has a really interesting thing. They talked to executives around the world. 51% said we're going to increase our use of the independent workforce. It's a growing trend. There's no question about it. CEOs see the writing on the wall and they say, I cannot afford to have this big permanent workforce. I can't do it. I just am not certain enough about the future to commit to all these people. So I'm going to go with a more temporary, flexible workforce. So you're going to see this traditional acceleration away from traditional jobs. I think it's going to be your ability to build and maintain a network, that's going to be really core to your success. Whether you're in HR or whether you're in any other field, it's going to be really having this network and a whole series of relationships so that you can find work when you need work, that you have to build opportunities for yourself. So we're really all going to have to become better at creating our own opportunities, at building our own networks, exploring and building our own relationships in order to really thrive in the 21st century. And I think you need to think about moving away from thinking about a job to thinking about what are your skills? What are you good at doing? And I think it's really a mistake to say, I'm an HR executive. I think you need to say, I can do this or this. I can help people make decisions. I can give you advice. I can coach. I can counsel. That's much more important to me than that you have a title and a job. I don't think that's going to be a survival skill. It's going to be a set of what are the skills that you have. So you're an HR person, so what can you do actually? And you ask people and they go, blah, 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 yeah.
A question, you didn't mention blockchain technology. Will blockchain technology accelerate the acceleration in this respect?
We had a long conversation about that this morning, actually, on the blockchain. I don't know that I really have time to get into it here, but how many of you are familiar with blockchain? Okay, a very small number of people. I don't think I'm going to get into it right now because it will divert us. I will never finish in my 45 minutes. But if anybody would like to talk about blockchain later, I'd be happy to talk to you about that, and we can do that. I think you're going to see a lot of jobs that I call are being atomized or broken down into their skills and their what you actually do. So it's not going to be good to say, I'm a recruiter. You're going to have to say, oh, I'm a sourcer, or I'm an interviewer, or I'm a particular skill, because that's what I want to hire. I don't necessarily want to hire a recruiter. I want somebody that can do X or Y or Z or whatever it is, okay? So it's a very different way of thinking about what you do. But if I were to ask you right now, write down on a piece of paper the 3 most powerful skills that you have, how many of you could do that right now in a second? But how many of us say, oh, I'm an HR generalist, or I'm this, or I'm that? But the question really is, so what can you do? And that's a different question. So think about that. So I think we're going to see a slight decrease in hiring experts, and this will accelerate over the next decade, because experts are pretty much all going to become consultants. And what you're going to have inside the company are going to be broadly skilled, agile, flexible people who can learn many different things and do a bunch of different skills. So a permanent employee will probably not be likely to be a highly skilled, in-depth expert. There may be a few of them, but not very many. Most of the people are going to be these broadly skilled, flexible, project-oriented kinds of people. And the experts you'll hire as you need them as contingent workers, consultants, or contractors. Okay? This is one of the more controversial statements that I make in what I say. Experts don't like to hear me say this, but I think actually for the experts it's probably better too, because they're going to have a lot more variety of experience and potentially earn a lot more money than if they're just locked into a company their whole life. A lot of micro jobs are going to grow. And these are jobs that we don't even identify today as jobs. They're using this because they don't have any other term for it. But Cisco Systems and MasterCard, a number of companies are doing this. And these are taking permanent employees internally and letting them do all sorts of small little jobs that need to be done around the company. Fill in on a project where you may not have a lot of expertise, but you have an interest. So let's say there's a project about funding or financing some project in your company, and you are an HR, but you have an interest in finance. You might volunteer to work for a week or a month on this team to get a few skills. They call this micro jobs. So there's all sorts of experimentation going on, which is, like I said, part of the 21st century. Org structures are changing as well. And they're really becoming much less hierarchical. We're removing layers of management. We've been doing this since the 1980s, but it's continuing today. They're far more networked. It's much more important about who do you connect with, who do you know, who can you talk to. If you need to get something done in the company, the question is not so much can you do it, it's who do you know that can help us get this done. And if you don't know anybody that can help you get it done, you're less valuable than the person who knows a whole lot of people that can get it done. And so having that network is really a powerful tool for your own professional development, building relationships and having real connections to people everywhere. And you've got to be very flexible. The companies have to move as the world changes. So you've got to be able to go quickly. The real issue with the taxi industry, which is quite interesting between Europe and Asia, when Uber came to the United States and Europe, there was with resistance. The taxi companies tried to throw up legal barriers, tried to sue them, take them to court, did everything in their power to stop Uber. In Asia, the taxi companies developed their own app and almost wiped Uber out. In fact, eliminated them out of China simply by competing on their same terms. So that was just so beautiful. Singapore has a thing called Grab Taxi, and it's their own app on the phone. It's much better than Uber. And they made a deal with every taxi company, and the taxi companies are now Ubers, only they're called Grab Taxi. So they just didn't resist it, they went with the flow. And I think this is the example we've got to live with. Go with the flow. You're not going to stop it. How can you do the same thing or better? How can you do what they do and do it better than they do it? So this highly flexible, project-focused, and digital. And we know that everything is going to ultimately, or many things will become digital, automated, and so forth. So the real joke is, what's the app for that? Is there an app for that? Right? Okay, so process automation, analytics, digitization are going to grow rapidly. They're going to affect every career, every nook and cranny of what we do. There's no question about that. I just put HR up here as an example of what could be automated today. And you can disagree with me, that's fine, I don't mind. This is just kind of a rough cut. Payroll, 100% automated. Really don't need anybody. Benefits administration, 100% automated. Performance management, 80%. New online feedback tools, automatic feedback and so forth tools. People can assess each other. You don't need HR to intervene. Recruiting, probably even today, it could be about 90%. I think humans are involved in the final decision making, the last piece of it, overcoming a candidate's objections, convincing them to say yes is still a human activity. But all the assessment, sourcing can all pretty much be automated today. Learning, again, 90%, apps, online tools, MOOCs, all kinds of tools out there for self-learning. Okay? Career development, again, that requires a little more probably discussion and conversation with people about where you want to go, what you want to do, where you want to be. So that's not really very automatable, I don't think, nor is employee coaching, nor employee engagement. Those are the more human sides of things, where we have to deal with people and how they feel and think and so forth. And employee relations. So all those things down there are kind of the soft side of HR. And that's the side that's going to be much more difficult to automate. I'm not sure we want to automate it. This is where you want people involved, and we want to talk to people. And then there's HR administration, and that should be automated already. All right. So these are the things that, you look at this and say, well, what's left for me? What am I going to do? And what you're going to do is all this stuff at the bottom: coaching, influencing, helping people. This is really where humans are much better than computers. All right. So let computers do what they do and do what we do better than they do. So predictive analytics are already improving hiring tremendously. I think most of us, if we're honest, realize that interviews are pretty much a waste of time. They either confirm our own biases, or they, at best, are a way to engage with a candidate for a few minutes and have a chat. But are you really able to determine my entire personality and skill set in a 30 or 40-minute interview? I really don't think so. But can we use technology to help? Absolutely. And we know we can assess your personality with Facebook, with tools that are out there. We can do all sorts of games and simulations to test whether or not you have certain skills. There's all sorts of tools that we have at our command, if we want, that can do a whole lot of the assessment process. But in the end, this is not what's important. What's important really is, once you've gone through this assessment, can I convince this person to come work for me? Can I really influence this person? Can I overcome whatever objections they have to working here? That's the skill. And when you look at the really, really good executive recruiters, they don't worry much about what we in corporate recruiting often worry about, sourcing, screening. They don't worry about any of that stuff that much. What they spend most of their time doing is talking. Talking to the hiring manager, talking to the candidate, influencing the hiring manager, influencing the candidate, and making a match. That's what they do. And that's what recruiting is all about. It's about human connection. The other stuff just keeps us busy. Chatbots are going to be everywhere. How many of you are familiar with chatbots? Chatbots are little things that pop up on your screen and says, hi, my name's whatever. They're all women. Karen, Sally, Olivia, Aria. There's only one I know, it's Dutch. It's called Wade and Wendy. And half of it's male, half of it's female. But most of them are all women. I'm not sure why. But they pop up on your screen and they'll say, hi, my name's Olivia. What's your name? And you'll type in your name. And it'll say, hi, what are you looking for? Let's say if it's a recruiting chatbot. You'll say, I'm looking for an HR job. Oh, great. How long have you been working in HR? So it's already assessing, do you have enough experience to meet our requirements, all right? You say 3 years, and they say, oh, great. Let me show you a couple of opportunities that we have here. And it'll take you, do you have any questions? You might say, yeah, what's the salary on that? It'll answer it. Now, is it really smart? No. It's following a script that was written by you or somebody. If the candidate doesn't answer in a certain way, it's pretty much done. It has to say, sorry, I'll have to have you call the recruiter. But is it engaging? Yes. Is it really useful to you? Absolutely. Candidates are much more likely to continue to learn about your opportunities if somebody is interacting with them than if they're just looking at a flat screen. So there's a lot of benefits to it, and they will get smarter and better over the next few years. Right now they're pretty retarded actually, but they're getting better and better as we move along here. But you're going to see a lot more of these that are going to be able to interact with the candidates. They're going to be able to use analytics to actually screen a candidate based on other candidates that have applied for a job or against a benchmark. These are the more sophisticated chatbots. So, eventually we'll be able to pretty much direct a potential hire to one of these chatbots, and they'll do 50 or 60% of our job as recruiters, what we have done as recruiters, for us, and do it in a very fun, engaging, and automated way that will hopefully keep candidates interested in the job. And it will then make us recommendations to us as to, I think you ought to hire this person versus this person. So these are the things that are coming where technology can actually really help us in what we do and make it much more effective. I've talked a lot about learning, and I think it's really important to understand that this is going to be at least a few decades where learning will be one of the most important things we all have to do. We have to continue to learn about things like chatbots and AI. We've got to learn about anything that comes up at your work that you don't understand. You should say to yourself, I better go learn more about this. And the good thing is you don't have to go to college anymore to do that. You don't have to spend a lot of money on an expensive course. You can go to YouTube and probably find out a whole lot of this stuff, okay? The sources of learning are infinite today. There's so many things that you can do. And there's all these courses, LinkedIn Learning, which some of you may have learned as was Lydia a few years ago. This is an absolutely incredible tool for learning like a software package or learning tools that you may run into. And the whole idea in the 21st century is your boss isn't going to say, go take this course or go learn this. You're going to have to say, I better go figure this out. I better go learn this and go and access the tools, okay? And that's the beauty of Google and all the search tools that we have out there and all these apps. So we have LinkedIn, we've got Coursera, which provides basically college-level courses online, mostly for free, or if they cost money, they're very cheap, maybe 70 euros, 80 euros for a course. So nothing too expensive and yet very, very powerful. Many of them will actually give you a certificate or a certificate if you pay a little money for it at the end of it. And then there's things like Skillshare and so forth. These are things where people share their knowledge with other people. And there's 100 other of them. There's apps for your phone. The learning is infinite, the variety of things that you can learn out there. And so I think the real issue for all of us is how do we continue to develop our skills. Not formal skills, not degreed skills, not necessarily certified skills. That may be useful to some degree, but what's really going to be useful is what the heck do you know? And what are you confident in saying you can do to somebody that might want to hire you? And if you see an opportunity come up and say, I can do that, or if you can't do it, go learn how to do it really quickly. And you know, one of the things that Google has done in the last couple of years is they have changed their whole recruiting process. And if you remember Google about 10 years ago, they required you to have gone to a handful of high-level colleges, to have a very high grade point average from university. You had to meet all these requirements that really fit tiny percentage of people. And they hired a guy named Laszlo Bock as their head of people analytics. And the first thing he did was come in there and look and say, does this really matter? Do the people who went to these elite schools, are they any more productive than the few people we have here who didn't go to these elite schools, all right? Does GPA really make any difference in performance? And all of his analysis said it made no difference whatsoever. There was no correlation. And most of us already knew that anyway, intuitively, but he proved it with data. And he said what really did matter at Google were, number one, that you could work with other people really well, team player. That was absolutely essential to working effectively at Google. So if you were the person that said, I do it myself, you know, I don't like other people around me, I'll just go do it, you were not a good fit for Google. The second thing was you had to be able to learn quickly. And he said, how did they determine that? So they asked people in the interview process, and they have a whole different way of interviewing. They said, tell me about some time in your life when you learned something without going to school. What'd you learn? And it's even better if you said you learned it with a couple other people, because that showed you were also a team player. So if you said, oh, my neighbor and I got together and we built a computer, that's an A+, all right? Or if you said, you know, I made a robot when I was in 6th grade, or, you know, whatever it was on my own, that's what they're looking for at Google. Self-learners, self-initiated, didn't have to ask anybody, didn't go take a college course, and people that work with other people really well. Those are the two most important skills to get hired at Google. If you have an engineering degree, that's a plus, but it's not a requirement. Okay? So this is a really interesting shift in how we think about what are the important things that you want in your workforce when you hire them. What are the key skills that really make a difference to you when you hire somebody in your company? And I don't think we really give that enough thought. We kind of go with the standard job description, and that probably is completely off the mark for what we really want in somebody. Okay? So I think the jobs of the future are really going to use people who, in work that require intuition, influence, relationship building, understanding the context of a situation. Computers don't understand what's going on. They only can respond with rules. You see at the bottom, I've got thin data and thick data. Let me just talk a little bit about that. Thin data is just numbers, data, information. Right? If I know that 2 and 2 is 4, that's thin data. Why do I want to know that? What's the point? Okay, I know it's 4, but so what? So what's the point of all that? Okay, so AI is really good at thin data. That's what it's all about. And thin data is really useful to us as part of our overall decision-making process. And humans add stuff to it that we now call thick data. And rather than AI, they're calling it IA, which is intelligent augmentation. All right? So the computers make you smarter by giving you information that you maybe didn't have before, but they don't do it for you. They help you, and they augment what you do. And I think that's really a very important understanding that we are thick data people. We have context. I understand. I can feel emotion. I understand the whole situation that you're in. The computer may say, you know, you shouldn't do this. This is not right, whatever, you didn't follow the rule. But I may understand why you didn't follow that rule. I may have a bigger picture of what's going on and make a very different decision. How many of you are Star Trek fans? Anybody here? You have to be old, like Star Trek, I guess. In Star Trek, there were 2 characters. One was called Dr. Spock. And if you remember Dr. Spock, he was not human. He was from some other planet. And he was totally, his whole life was based on logic. And you had Captain Kirk, who was human, and he was the starship commander. And the counterpoint between those two is really what I'm talking about. Because Spock would say, but Captain, that's not logical. And the captain would say, well, I really don't care. I'm going to go do this because he had the context, the thick data, and made a very different decision. So someday watch Star Trek. I think you'll find it quite interesting in relation to this conversation here. But, you know, I think it's really the fact that we have to be able to unlearn as quickly as we learn something. So, you know, whatever you know now is probably not very valuable anymore. So, you know, the idea is you just forget about it, move on. And, you know, we kind of hang on to what we are comfortable with. I'm really good at X. Well, maybe X is no longer of any real value, but we sort of hang on to X because it's what I'm good at. So the idea is, how do you throw that away and learn the new skills? Typically, this is applied to programming languages. You know, when I went to college, I learned BASIC. Anyone here know BASIC? Only if you're in my age group, all right? But, you know, programming languages change, you know, every year. There's a new programming language. And so if you're a programmer, you have to be able to learn these new languages on an almost non-stop basis. But you can't walk around saying, I'm a Fortran expert, because that will get you nothing but the unemployment line, all right? So you really have to be able to learn and unlearn quickly. That's a really important thing, okay? So I put up two scenarios that I'll just leave you with as food for thought of, you know, what I think will happen and what could possibly happen. If you're familiar with scenario planning, you usually put up a couple of potential futures. This is the one I think is most likely to be our future. That machine learning will significantly augment what we do. It'll help us to make decisions. It will offer suggestions for us. It will reduce our workload. I think in general, it's going to be a pretty positive thing for us. I think we're going to get a lot of feedback from many sources, and many of us aren't going to be comfortable with that. We're going to get feedback from our peers, from our friends, from our computers. You're going to be able to take all kinds of little online tests that may tell you things you didn't really want to know about yourself, okay? I think you're going to find that most transactional work will be automated and won't be important to do anymore. I think you're going to find that mobile is going to become the way almost everything happens. I think you'll probably see the end of desktop computers, except for very specialized applications. So if you're a recruiter, you better make sure everything that you have on your website looks good on a mobile phone, because your candidates probably don't even own a computer and certainly will not own one. So you've got to think about everything in terms of mobile, in terms of being small, flexible, very different than the world we had in computers. I think we've got to really understand that we're going to really be moving away from a lot of stuff that brought us money and fame in the 20th century. Becoming a very deeply intelligent mechanical engineer may not be a big, promising career in the 21st century. But being a really good influencer, psychologist, relationship builder, networker, that may be a really cool skill in the 21st century. So I think we've got a big shift in how we think about what careers and jobs are important. And I'm often asked by people that have school-age children, what should my son or daughter study in college? And my answer is really, if I had to give you an answer right now, I would say the most liberal arts courses they could find, the broadest, most skilled courses they could get. Politics, philosophy, history, languages, and yes, math, and yes, science, but all those things. But should they study to be an engineer? Only if they have a true passion to be an engineer. If they truly really want to do it, I have no issue with that. But if you're pushing them to do it, I think you're making a big mistake. Okay? I think scenario 2 is where everything gets automated. I think there's a pretty low likelihood that's going to happen. I think I could even put 10, I'm not sure it will happen, where virtually all work is disrupted and disintermediated, where routine jobs are almost all automated, traditional jobs eliminated, much smaller workforce, lots of people not employed, a lot of decisions made by algorithms and so forth and so on. Managers just talk to Alexa or Siri and say, who should I hire? Siri tells them, I'll hire Charlie or Sally or whoever. And the analytics, predictive and prescriptive, are going to be just routine in the workplace. I think maybe elements of this will happen, but this whole thing is, I think, pretty unlikely to happen. Even though you will hear people tell you that this is going to happen, I think it's very low likelihood. I think automated cars are very low likelihood. And if you talk to the real deep AI researchers, augmented cars that help you drive, absolutely, absolutely. Cars that maybe park themselves, sure. Cars that can drive on the highway when there's nothing going on by themselves, yeah, sure, no problem. But 100% take over your driving, at least minimum 10 years and probably 20 or 30 before that happens, okay? So no matter what you hear, I think you hear a lot of hype about AI. And everybody that's in AI has a vested interest in the hype because that's what is hot right now and that's their career. But AI has been around for 30 years. I was working in AI in the 80s and it didn't go anywhere then, hardly. And the main reason they say now is we didn't have the computer power. Well, there's more reasons than just the computer power. It takes a lot to duplicate a human being and our abilities and our skills, and far more than we think it does. But they will do a lot for us, and AI is a wonderful and positive thing, but it's not going to do all of our work for us. Not going to happen. So predictions for next year, if you want these, and I don't give any guarantee on these, all right? More and more automation of routine and repetitive work. A beginning of a defocus on the expert world. I think you're going to find the sort of the bloom is going to slowly come off that more onto the generalist role. Continuous learning is going to be emphasized, encouraged, and more necessary to get things done. Increase and even dominance of AI and analytics, maybe more than we want. There's going to be a lot of hype around AI and analytics. Our job is to look at it intelligently and make your own decision about it. Okay? And I think that's a job we all have to go out and learn a little bit more about AI, not just accept what you read. Remember, every newspaper sells newspapers, whether it's digital or on paper, by saying we're doomed. All right? Nobody's going to buy that by everything's going to be pretty much the same. All right? So, you got to really think about and apply some judgment to what you're reading. Realization that people are still necessary and important and will continue to be, although what we do will be different and will definitely change. And I thank you.